Hey, it's Greg here with MaritimeGardening.com, and I thought I'd give a little update on my composting situation here in the garden. I've tried different methods over the years with varying degrees of success and challenges as well, so I thought I'd just give an overview and where I am now with that whole thing. So, I have a big 2,500 square foot garden, right? It's got a fence around it, and it's got a forest behind the fence. And in that forest there are porcupines, rabbits, raccoons, bears, coyotes, foxes, everything. Skunks, right? Everything's in there. Okay. So having a compost station like people typically buy, you know, those big plastic things you stick it in your backyard, that works in the suburbs. It doesn't work in a situation like this because it'll just get knocked over. Squirrels will chew holes through it to get at stuff. And this is even if you're not putting meat in it and stuff like that. If you know when you've got a property like this, wild animals are wandering by all the time, and if they get close to something and you get a good smell of it, they're going to investigate further and they're going to find a way to get into it, right? Squirrels and chipmunks will chew, and mice and stuff like that will chew holes through it, and raccoons will climb and just, you know, they got hands, they'll get into it, and bears will just knock it over and get at it. And you know, we don't put any sort of meat or anything like that. That's put separately. We just put it in the freezer and we put it out on compost day, and the city takes it away. The municipality takes it away. We're not in a city here really, but we're connected to a city. But even when you're just putting fruit and vegetables and stuff like that, you know, we do a lot of cooking. Most of our cooking is done from scratch, so we have a lot of kitchen waste. So even if it's just ends of lettuce and half-rotten grapes and whatever, right? Animals are drawn to that smell and they will get into it. So it's always been a challenge to have a composting station here that isn't also simultaneously drawing in animals. So what I've taken to doing is composting inside the garden here, right? Away from the fence, or at least not too, you know, like on the inside of the fence. That way the wild animals, they're not going to be wandering right next to it. They're not going to be wandering by it, right? And they're less likely to discover it. And being very choosy with what I stick in it. I put a lot of garden weeds in it, but I also put kitchen scraps in it. But again, no meat or anything like that. No protein, that sort of thing, right? So here's what I've got now. It's this is just an old piece of roofing metal. We had our roof done with a metal roof. Some leftover stuff. They were going to take it away, but I said I want that stuff. So that's my lid. Pretty low tech. I've got plans to make something a little bit more, you know, nice looking, but that works. You know, a piece of metal with a rock on it. That keeps things from getting in. I mean, if anything really wants to get in, they can, but I haven't had a problem yet, and I've had this like this for months, right? So here I've got some garden waste, just some old leaves, some bolted lettuce that we're kind of done with. There is ways to cook bolted lettuce, but we've got so much of it, it doesn't matter. I planted too much lettuce this year. So I initially had these two. These are storage containers from like Home Depot. I think they were 14 or 15 bucks each. And they're reasonably large, okay? And they had plastic lids. And I originally had them stacked on top of one another so they take up less space. And I had holes in the bottom so they could drip down into each other. And I had the whole unit was raised off the ground, and I would collect the stuff that came out of it and put that in my watering can and use it also like a compost tea to water plants. So that's what I would do. And I mean, that worked, but every time it rained, the thing that was collecting the stuff underneath would overflow. And all that fertile water would go into the ground in my pathways here. Fertilize my pathways, which I'm kind of I mean, the principle of my garden here is I got sand pathways and really, really healthy no-till beds. And the idea is the pathway is a desert and the garden is an oasis, and that is the effect I get. But when you've got compost tea dripping into your sand all the time, you get a lot of weeds growing in your sand. So, and also I just couldn't keep up with it. You know, like you get a really good rain and all of a sudden you've got all this compost tea, but you don't need it because it just rained, right? You need it 2 weeks after that when the plants start being starved for water. And you don't want that stuff sitting around. It goes rancid and that sort of thing. It just became completely, it seemed like a great idea in principle, but it was just completely impractical. So I said, why don't I just take these two things, put them side by side, in a part of the garden that's not very productive. This spot here, it's kind of shady and nothing really grows well here. Things grow, but they just don't grow well. So I said, why don't I just stick them there and put them side by side, and I'll put the sort of finished stuff on one side and the fresh stuff on the other side, right? And just keep working it like that, right? So when I run it, I'm using this right now to top dress some pumpkins. That's why I came up with the idea for this video. But when this runs out of good stuff, I'll put some of that aside in a container to use in the garden, but I'll put the rest of the soil on top of this, right? Because it breaks down faster if you got soil on top of it, right? I always got soil. It's like a soil sandwich. You got, underneath is the soil of the garden, and all kinds of organisms come up through that, and then you've got soil on top, and it just helps keep all the stuff that's breaking down moist, right? So I'll move it all over and start a new one. But I mean, this was all of this stuff was like this in April. It's now July, and it's broken down really well, and I've probably only turned it once or twice, so it's worked really well. All right, so not a very sophisticated procedure. I take some of it for use in the garden, which I've put in this container here, and then I take enough to cover what's in the other one, and I'm making my compost sandwich sort of thing, right? That should be good. Wouldn't hurt to water this over here, but you don't have to. There's enough water in the plant matter that's in the compost and in the soil, right? There's enough water there. All right, I'll leave a little bit of that soil in there, right? Unfinished compost or somewhat finished compost to just get the next batch of stuff going on here. So now we're going to leave this one alone, and we're going to start adding stuff to this, and I'll use this for whatever I need my compost for, right? And it'll probably take a good month or so for this to break down. Maybe in about 2 or 3 weeks I'll come back with a pitchfork and turn this over once, and that's about all I'll do. This will start going down, so over time I'll actually add stuff to it, but that's it. That's all I do. Put the net back on, put the rock back on, put the shovel back on, and then we get hurricanes and stuff here, so you always got to worry about winds, but that's it. The main problem, aside from not being able to keep up with the compost with my original system, the other main problem was that the lids, which are made of a different kind of plastic, an inferior kind of plastic, the lids became brittle and broke down. I mean, they're also exposed to UV, right? Much more than these ones for whatever reason, because they're on top, right? But also they're just like, this is just a different kind of plastic. It's not as brittle. You can just tell it's more rubbery and kind of a softer plastic, and it just seems to be tougher and more durable, which makes sense when you're making a heavy duty storage container. And by putting this lid over the top, I keep it out of the sun, right? I really don't, some of you might ask about, I'm a very passive compost guy. I don't really do a lot of work. I stick everything in there. I might turn it over once a month, maybe, right? I just let it sit, sort of thing. Put stuff on top, keep putting stuff on top. When I pull weeds, I'm not too meticulous about getting the soil off the roots of the weeds. And the soil right next to the roots of weeds is usually really good stuff, right? Because it's got all the, what's it called? Exudates, right? It's got the, plants capture energy from the sun, but they invest some of that into the soil to attract organisms. So the soil that's attached to the weeds goes in to this box, right? Let's see, like, yeah, so here's an old lettuce that was pulled, and you can see the roots, and there's soil in the roots, right? So every time I weed, the bed's it's getting new weeds and soil. Yeah, I do what they call cold composting, not hot composting. It's just too much for me. I mean, I got a garden this size, I can't be bothered. I don't really care. I just, stick it somewhere, it gets used up, it all breaks down. You have a bunch of weeds like this and old vegetables, and then you've got a bowl of kitchen scraps, which is usually much wetter, right? Because it's just got whatever, stuff in it that makes it wet. So you put that on top. I don't bother watering this. There's always something going in that provides enough moisture for whatever the soil organisms need to break everything down. I don't worry about it. I don't add water. I don't, I don't do anything to, I just put this lid on, and whatever is in there, and it seems to work out just fine. So it's a really simple system. The added value of this system is that, whenever I want, let's say next spring, what I could do is move these aside and dig up some of the soil that's underneath them, because it's guaranteed the soil underneath these containers is very fertile, right? Because even though I'm not adding water, the water gets in, right? And there's also just water content in the materials I put in the compost. So there is an amount of, fairly high nutrient liquid dripping out of these. There's holes in the bottom. And you want holes in the bottom so worms and stuff can get up from the ground, right? Anyway, the soil underneath is likely quite fertile, right? So I could scrape some of that off, and screen it and use it elsewhere in the garden. And just a note on screening, a lot of people screen their compost. I find it's pretty loose. This time of year I use it for top dressing, so I just think it's a waste of time to screen it personally. I just throw it on, even though some of it's very fine and nice, and some of it's in clumps. I just throw it on top of stuff, and I don't bother screening it. You can. If I'm using this for planting seedlings, I will screen it. But other than that, I just use it as is for top dressing. I don't see the point in doing all that extra work. Anyway, just a little update on the composting situation. I think this approach works really well. It's cheap, right? It's like, two $14 containers and something to go over top. They came with lids, but the lids break down. So you just find something that's big enough. You put them side by side, and you find something big enough to go over top of both of them, an old door, countertop, whatever, just any kind of stuff, right? And it should last for years and years and years. Really simple to do, and it works just fine. And because it's inside my gardening enclosure, so far anyway, it has not been attacked or picked at by anything. I've seen no evidence of it. You can usually tell. It's usually kind of obvious. So far, nothing's really gotten to it. So far, so good, right? Anyway, I hope you found that interesting. If you did, please like, share, subscribe. Until next time, get out there, get at it, have fun in your garden. Thanks for watching.